School Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. Netenyahu controls the White House with the Epstein files. Trump forced to commit treason and attack Iran. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform. Y'all will Netanyahu is in control of our Congress and our government, and we will have war with Iran. Let's get straight into the content. Salute.
The meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump has been concluded. Benjamin Netanyahu rushed 2 weeks ahead of a scheduled meeting with the American president in what appeared to be as a desperate move coming from Israel to either sabotage the talks between the American side and the Israeli side, and also to guarantee that the Israeli demands are met with these negotiations after multiple reports came out that the United States isn't really putting a red line to these talks. This came up after the United States actually agreed to have these talks without having prerequisites, and Israel was very worried about that. They want Israel to completely get rid of its nuclear program. They want Iran to get rid of its missile capabilities. They want Iran to stop supporting the resistance movements. They want them to come up with a public statement denouncing the fact that they called for the elimination of the State of Israel, alongside a list that always increases and becomes longer and longer with time. So what happened in the meeting, and what did they agree or didn't agree on, and what are the expected moves? Firstly, there was something very interesting that happened after the meeting, which was the fact that both Netanyahu and Donald Trump did not have press statements. The whole meeting was private. They didn't have several meetings that were public and private, and it lasted 1 hour longer than scheduled. It was supposed to take 2 hours, and instead it took 3 hours. And here we can see Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. Donald Trump without too many expressions, Netanyahu having his usual smirk when he sees Donald Trump. So what did they talk about? Well, naturally, not a lot of details were published about the contents because there was no public statement. However, we did hear that from the Israeli media that Israel spoke about certain red lines, and these red lines are similar to the demands. This was one of the reports that came in the Israeli media. US President signaling to the Iranians that he prefers the diplomatic option, but not for long. The meeting with Netanyahu lasted longer than expected, and the Prime Minister presented Israel's red lines. If the negotiations collapse, Trump is preparing for more significant action than the one that stalled last month. As a matter of fact, in the statement that Donald Trump released himself on Truth Social, he also did not put in very specific details about action. They only said that they will continue the talks with Iran and that they are looking to get an agreement. And if they don't get an agreement, all options are on the table. Probably not what Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to hear from the American president. And from an American perspective, despite these statements coming from Donald Trump and the seemingly more diplomatic approach, on the ground, we're seeing different movements coming from the American side. We spoke about the potential of the United States sending another aircraft carrier. Now this has been confirmed by the Wall Street Journal that the Pentagon is preparing a second aircraft carrier to deploy to the Middle East, still in the United States now. And they are preparing it to be sent to Iran. And we're talking about USS George H.W. Bush to be sent next to Iran. The United States, of course, also threatened and warned all of the ships from going into Iranian waters in what appears to be a preparation for a de facto embargo, similar to what they've done with Venezuela. Maybe they want to check if that method would work with Iran. However, it's not necessarily the case. The two countries are different in a huge way. Iran is not Venezuela, and they are not to even be compared to Venezuela, apart from, of course, certain political alignments or the general perspective, the general approach of their alliances globally. So the United States and Trump are saying the attack is not necessarily imminent now. They prefer the diplomatic option. And from Netanyahu's perspective, what is the deal then? Okay, well, if the United States is saying, okay, diplomacy, what is Israel going to do if Netanyahu is not happy with that? Well, some people spoke with Netanyahu before the meeting took place in the United States. And according to these people who spoke with Benjamin Netanyahu, an attack is not a case of if, but when. This came in one of the Israeli mainstream media outlets. Despite the ongoing diplomacy, Netanyahu believes a military confrontation with Iran is inevitable, according to the people who spoke with him before the meeting. And to others, according to other statements, he said that it's not a case of if we will attack Iran, but when. He tried to seek more reassurances from Donald Trump about having the freedom of Israel to carry out an attack against Iran. And he also wanted to have guarantees how Israel is going to be protected in case it gets attacked by Iran as a response to an Israeli attack, or if they actually start with an attack against Iran. So we have statements coming from the American president, apparently not necessarily aligned with Benjamin Netanyahu, but that doesn't always really matter because we know the strategic partnership here between Israel and the United States. And we also know how things turned out eventually in previous times with escalations with Iran. Of course, they will not agree on everything. And of course, there are elements within the United States who don't want to war with Iran, like the majority of the American public who don't necessarily want to war. And they view this as a move primarily led by the pressure of the Zionist lobby and due to the pressure of the Zionist lobby. So there's somewhat of a difference, apparently, between this position of Netanyahu and the position of Donald Trump. But how real is it, especially with the recent confirmation from the United States that they're going to deploy another aircraft carrier, which would bolster their forces over there even more, and again would put them in a position of total readiness. They've recently just deployed their air defenses as well. They've had multiple deployments in the past several weeks with their aircraft. Now their air defenses are fully mobile in a way to prepare themselves for an immediate movement in case Iran decides to retaliate to any such attack coming from either the United States or Israel against the American bases in the region. So if Trump is saying we prefer the talks, then when are these talks going to happen?
Let me show you how to enable or disable the add to home screen model here on JotForm apps. So follow me to my desktop right now. Welcome to JotForm. My name is George, and on this video,
the Supreme National Security Council Secretary, Ali Larijani, just said that we did not carry any written message to the Americans, and there is no date set for the next rounds of negotiations. He ended by saying both sides want them to continue. We heard those statements as well from some officials in Iran who have been involved in the talks too. But there are no confirmed rounds, and there is no guarantee that everything is going to move forward. So is that going to be the case, or is it not going to be the case that they're going to continue talking? Chances are The United States, under Donald Trump, the same man who actually withdrew from the previous agreement, the nuclear treaty that they had with Iran that had a certain limit on nuclear enrichment, but at the same time lifted sanctions of Iran, returned frozen assets to Iran and funds. He unilaterally withdrew after Israeli pressure. Now he is trying to get an agreement with Iran that would probably be more limiting to the Iranian capabilities. And let's not forget that the whole move is primarily led by the Zionists. They are the ones who demanded it, and they are the ones who wanted it, not necessarily Trump himself, nor the American country in general, but we have administrations that always align with Israel and the Zionists. So he can try and do that with Iran. Chances are he's not really going to get a much better deal than what they had before. Iran is not likely to give in to any sort of pressure coming from the United States to do with its independence, its sovereignty, its right to enrich uranium, and let alone anything to do with their missile and defensive capabilities that are intended to act as a deterrence. And this has proven to be effective during the 12-day war, when indeed it only lasted for 12 days, when Israel hasn't achieved any of its objectives. If we judge the current climate based on the previous rounds and the previous attacks that Iran faced, chances are that this time it's more likely that the United States will attack Iran, whether it begins the attack itself or waits for an Israeli attack, or has this orchestration of a scenario where they are talking or pretending to talk, or claiming that they prefer to talk, and that is the ideal outcome, and then Israel goes and attacks that the United States immediately participates in against Iran.
As a father of 2 daughters, I know how important it is to protect our loved ones. But liberals are releasing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Geopolitical Trends, where truth matters. Here is what happens if Iran goes nuclear. The U.S. stops threatening military strikes and start negotiating. Sound counterintuitive, right? It's already happening with North Korea. So the U.S. talks tough to North Korea sometimes, or maybe all the time, but it never actually attacks. And why? Because nukes change the rules, and Iran knows it. And with this, we're going to ask the fundamental question: is Iran making the same mistake twice by entering into negotiations with the U.S.? Of course, there are those who are saying, I'm one of those, saying that the repeating mistakes argument, because it holds. And that argument is that Iran's previous negotiations, particularly the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was in 2015 when the agreement was made, ultimately backfired. Why? Because US withdrew in 2019 under Trump, reinstated sanctions, and didn't reciprocate Iranian compliance. And from this view, engaging again sets up Iran for similar disappointment. So the US political landscape is unstable as we speak. Why? Because usually the administrations change. So enforcement is inconsistent. And this is why Iran has to think, is Iran giving up leverage here, while at the same time getting uncertain promises in return? And I find it very, very sort of confusing as to why Tehran will be thinking in these terms of, well, let's negotiate again with the Americans. The counter argument to that is that it suggests that Iran, because Iran is facing constrained options rather. Without negotiations, Iran faces even more intensifying sanctions, the regional isolation, which I don't believe in, and potentially the military confrontation, which is what's at the heart of what's going on. All of those are costly for Iran. I understand that argument. So negotiations, even risky ones, might be preferable to the alternative. And this is, again, when you have to go back to the 2015 agreement deal. It did work for several years. So the failure didn't come from, the failure came from external US politics, not the deal itself or the way it was designed. Because better terms or safeguards might have addressed this vulnerability before. And this is, again, where you have to think. And I'm finding myself, why is Iran entering into these talks with the US once again, knowing what just happened last time? It just doesn't add up. So whether, even if you think in terms of the JCPOA, whether actually constrained Iran nuclear program effectively, I will say yes, to a degree. There are those, of course, the skeptics and the critics, the critics that argue that dispute this sort of the verification mechanism. Well, of course, you can trust the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's the back door. You can't trust them. I never did anyway. But the thing is that the US withdrawal from that agreement was inevitable. And that in itself should give Iran a pause into thinking, should we get into other negotiations here? And this in itself, the question that is ultimately involves around is the judgment about the risk tolerance for Tehran. Of course, the trust issue. And one of the key is whether past patterns determine future outcome. This is, again, what Iran has to deal with right now. And that paved the way, again, for that legitimate questions. Has Iran learned anything from past history when the US withdrew from the JCPOA in 2019? It's to those who say, well, Iran appeared to have learned. Well, apparently not the case, because if they are getting involved in negotiations once again, that means they haven't learned.
Nathan Watkins wants to spend taxpayer dollars on liberal lobbyists pushing a liberal agenda. And Watkins testified to the legislature against capping your property taxes. But Watkins didn't even pay his own. Nathan Watkins, wrong for taxes.
Contact Roberts Air for all your heating and cooling needs.
What Iran learned back then is that the acceleration of its nuclear program after the 2019 withdrawal of the US, that is suggests it understood the risks of restraint without reciprocations. In other words, Iran gave up something, but it didn't get something back in return. And that's when Iran began enriching uranium at a higher level and expanded the centrifuges operations. And that essentially signals that if the US wouldn't honor its commitments, Iran wouldn't either. But just think about it. In case Iran had the nuclear capability, we will even be having this discussion? I don't think so. And I'm going to get into the case of North Korea to draw a parallel for you to have a better understanding. So please make sure to stay with me till the end, because I have one particular or two major announcements I want to make. One of them is a question and one of them is an announcement. So make sure you stay with me till the end here. So what Iran ended up doing after that in 2019? It diversifies its negotiating partners and sources of support. Why? Because if it depends solely on dealing with the US, it's not going to work. So what Iran ended up doing is diversify that and strengthen the ties with Russia and China. And that in itself reduced the isolation. And that, in my opinion, suggests that Iran learned that relying on a single adversary for a deal is very, very risky. But it still, it leads us to ask the question, why are they moving forward with these negotiations? Because now Iran is saying, we will sort of give up something in return for something. Are you once again going to trust the Trump administration? It was Trump that pulled the US out of JCPOA back in 2019. And with this, you say to yourself, where it's unclear whether Iran has learned or not, the core vulnerability remains. And those vulnerabilities are realistic. That was part of the reasons, of course, there are some foreign entities that have pushed for the demonstrations inside Iran. But one of the realities that existed within Iran itself domestically is the economic conditions. Because Iran's economy desperately needs some sort of sanction relief. And the US controls much of the global financial markets. So without the US buying in, or other partners can only do so much. Those are realities. We can't ignore them. In this case, Iran may have understood the risks that it's involved. And that's what's compelling it to negotiate because of the alternative. And why? Because to Iran's calculation, and this is me thinking outside the box, sustaining isolation and economic collapse are far worse than getting into negotiations with the Americans. But at the same time, this leads us to another question, because this is like a chain. They are all connected. Whether Iran can actually prevent a future US withdrawals. Who's to say if Iran enters into negotiations today, and let's say a year from today, the US will withdraw from the agreement? No, in my opinion, no negotiating tactics fully insulate Iran from US domestic political shifts, because that is what happened. It's exact setting that was in 2019. The withdrawal happened partly because of ideology and domestic politics right here in the US, not because Iran violated the deal or so. None of that. It's because of us. The same scenario that I'm seeing, the possibility of it happening. Then the practical tensions that exist, Iran, in my opinion, learned that it needs a leverage and shouldn't fully comply with guarantees. But also, and I am sort of, when Zarif used to be the former foreign minister at the time, I'm sure he learned at that time that also Iran has learned it has limited ability to guarantee US commitment. And we put this within the context of the current negotiations, if happening. So my sort of now seeing Iran trying to build a much harder to reverse mechanisms to maintain nuclear hedges. At the same time, if you go that route, that's going to make some sort of negotiations harder. And with all this, you put all this aside and you say to yourself, what if Iran acquired the nuclear weapons? Will we see tensions between the US and Iran today? And here is where I'm using North Korea as an example where the US dares to threaten North Korea. And to me, it's a counterfactual argument that we ought to think about. I mean, just think about it. Are we going to go and threaten North Korea? There are those who say, yeah, we threaten North Korea all the time. I don't think so. I don't think so. Because we know the North Koreans are not going to be bluffing and they're going to retaliate.
Our bookstore is like a portal.
It's neo-Victorian, it's steampunk.
And we wanted our Wix website site to be to. I'm Jenna.
Have we ever moved any like the way we're doing with Iran right now? And this is again where some are arguing using North Korea as a comparison point reveals, in my opinion, something very important about how nuclear weapons reshape strategic dynamics. That's just part of the dynamics of it. When you look at the North Korean model, and once again, this is when North Korea conducted the test in 2006, it was over. The US couldn't do squat about it. Even though there are, as I said, those who say, well, the US does threaten North Korea regularly through military exercises, the rhetoric and show of force. Yeah, but actually US doesn't threaten North Korea the way it does with Iran. Because those threats that the US issues, whatever, remain largely rhetoric, rhetorical, window dressing, bunch of hot air, because they don't translate into actual military strike or regime change attempts like what we're seeing in Iran. And why? Because once North Korea acquired the nuclear weapon, which was tested in 2006, first one, the calculus changed fundamentally, especially on part of the US. This is why a direct military action sort of becomes genuinely risky for the United States. So the relationship shifted towards deterrence on part of North Korea. On the part of the US will be the sanctions and some sort of periodic diplomatic overtures, or rather than military options. We are not seeing this with Iran. So Iran is now in critical state. Is it to embark on making the damn bomb and move on, or it's going to be living in this vicious cycle? Because here is the thing. If Iran has a nuclear weapon, whether it does or not at this point, they must have something. But if it is declared, that's a different story. But we go with the assumption that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. But if Iran does, tensions might likely still exist, but the nature of the US behavior will probably shift similarly the way it was with North Korea. Because here is what she will include. For example, you consider the continuation of the economic sanctions and the diplomatic pressure, like what we're doing to a degree with North Korea. You will maintain some military presence in the area. Of course, we have the bases in Bahrain, the Fifth Fleet. We have the Al Ubaid in Qatar. We have presence in Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq to a degree, and soon to be Syria. So we will maintain those kind of deterrent capabilities in the region. We will issue more rhetorical threats, more bravado towards Iran, but we will avoid military strike that could trigger nuclear retaliation in case Iran had a weapon. And one of the fundamental things that hypothetically if Iran had the nuclear weapons, what we're going to do is we will pursue negotiations from some sort of a position, one way or another, or rather than assuming military superiority. The same arguments I can make now about North Korea. I mean, just take a step back and think about it. Do we issue any threats against North Korea? Especially the picture you're looking at. This is when the last testing of the ICBM, which means it can hit the US. And that's where the key difference is from this particular scenario in today. When you think about it, today, when you think about it, as we speak, there are a lot of movements. You all know Bibi Netanyahu is in Washington. There's a lot of moving parts. But currently, the US and Israel retain that option of the military action or the strikes on a nuclear facilities once again. Because Iran doesn't have yet a nuclear deterrent. And Ali Khamenei will have at some point to make some sort of a damn decision and move on with this. He can't be dragging the country forever. Otherwise, this vicious cycle is going to be repeating itself. So, and that option, the nuclear deterrence, that option will disappear. So, because if Iran had the weapon or declared it, the US couldn't threaten regime change credibly. Regional allies like Saudi, like even Israel, will face different security calculations. But for Saudi Arabia now, the calculations are different. And this is one of the key things. I'm going to talk to you towards the end, because I will say something about it very, very important that no one is talking about. I'll mention that. The other aspects you have when it comes down to this, the paradox that exists vis-a-vis the ability to declare nuclear capabilities, is that nuclear weapon will reduce US military leverage. Once again, use North Korea as a case in point. And as a matter of fact, I will even go as far as saying, and please share with the community your opinion about this. In Europe, do you believe that if the nuclear weapons will reduce the US military leverage, it might actually lead to some form or make negotiations easier? What do you think? I see it that way. I see that if Iran would have stepped forward, move on with the nuclear program, declare itself a nuclear power, and the US wants to negotiate, now the negotiations will be much easier. Yes or no? What do you think? Because now both sides will have mutual incentives to avoid catastrophe, because that's usually what happens if one nuclear power is being sort of attacked or a military strike against it and so forth. And that is where those miscalculations, risks become even higher. What do I mean by this? What I mean by this, the idea like we did when we wanted to attack nuclear facilities for Iran. If Iran had the nuclear weapons, it will become too risky for us to do that. That's my point.
Helping users get to the right place at the right time is key to a smooth app experience. With the link element, you can guide you.
And this is where North Korea will be used as a template for Iran. You know, of course, tensions will persist. I'm not denying that, but they will be managed through two main things. One is deterrence. Second one is negotiations. Rather than having a military threat backed by credible strikes options. This is where I see the difference. And for Ali Khamenei or Iran establishment in general, they're going to have to move forward. Either make a damn decision and move with it, or stop talking completely. Because this wishy-washy is what's creating the problems for Iran right now. All its missiles can be nuclear tipped if they choose to. Yeah, all this. And mark my word that we will think twice about sort of threatening Iran in that case. So when you have now the Iran foreign minister, Mr. Abbas Araghchi, I don't know. I'm not judging the guy, because here is what he's saying. He's saying that Tehran is fully serious about the indirect negotiations that recently resumed with the United States. And Iran is seeking real negotiations that lead to a specific outcome. Didn't we have this back then? Why are you making the same mistake twice? There's a saying here in the US, I don't know if you're familiar with it, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. It will become now, the ball is in Iran's court. So when Mr. Araghchi is saying, well, we want the other side to show some level of seriousness and willingness to enter into negotiations that lead to a result, I am sorry, Mr. Araghchi, you are daydreaming respectfully here. I understand the economic conditions Iran is under. I understand how we pushed the currency for Iran to really sink down. But till when? You'll be talking about this negotiations for, it's not going to lead to anything. It's just spinning the wheel, no more, no less. And that's exactly what Mr. Arakchi stated to some ambassadors and the head of foreign missions in Tehran ahead of the 47th anniversary of the victory of the revolution. An exact word. I had to look up his statement, pulled up and translated from Farsi. Here is what it says, word for word. And I quote, "There is no way to resolve the Iranian nuclear issue except through diplomacy." End of quote. You are giving the Americans a hint that you don't have the balls to move forward the same way North Korea did. And look where the results are. That's how we interpret in this in Washington. We don't look at it like in terms of Iran is saying, if you address us in a language of force or pressure, we will respond with resistance. And if you address us in a language of dignity and respect, we will respond in kind. You know, what are you saying versus how the mindset here in Washington? We don't think in these terms of what Mr. Arakchi is saying. That's a waste of energy. We don't think like that. We think in terms of, if we can pressure you because you have no deterrent, then we're going to do it. But if you do have nuclear capability, for example, we will think twice about attacking you or threatening you or even consider striking. That's where the difference is. Liking this video so far? Don't just be a watcher. Go ahead and hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And don't forget to tap the bell so you will not miss any of my videos or live streams. This way, you will be supporting a channel that stands for the truth and objective reporting. The choice is yours. Thanks for your support. So the argument that within this nuclear context, the head of the representative of the Atomic Energy Organization in Iran, his name is Mohammed Islami. I hope I pronounce it correctly. He's saying that raising the issue of reducing uranium enrichment to 60% in negotiations with the US is linked to whether the other party will lift all sanctions or not. Are you kidding yourself? Do you think we're going to do that? And this is, again, when I am left to wonder how much, and I know, I wrote a book about Iran. I had to dig into the history of that particular country and understand how its government operates. They are very pragmatic. Iran government is. They are very pragmatic. But that pragmatism, when you bring it into conversation with the Americans, it's going to lead you nowhere, because we don't think in these terms, because you don't have the leverage. For example, North Korea does, which is why he went ahead and built the nuclear weapons, because they know they're for us to now to threaten North Korea. We won't.
Are you researching dental implants?
There's a lot of dental offices that'll talk about doing their teeth in the day process.
We won't. And this is, again, where you have that issue of understanding that, in my opinion, Iran is making the same, or is repeating the mistake. Holding negotiations once again, it's like it did back after 2015, or in 2015 that led to the JCPOA, only to find out 2 or 3 years later, the US withdrew in 2019. Under Trump, withdrew, reinstated sanctions, and that's it. And this is where you have to think, you know, what has Iran learned from the history, past history? And accelerating, you're going to have to make a decision. You're moving forward with it. Get the IAEA inspectors out, withdraw from the NPT altogether, same way Pakistan did, India did, North Korea did as well. And they moved forward. Look where they are today. And that is exactly because if Iran acquired the nuclear weapon, we will see tensions between the US and Iran. Today, no, we won't. We won't, because it won't exist. That is where the difference is. And you have to think in these terms. So, here is my conclusion for it. I just wanted to give you an update because I told you last time I'm going to be following up this because it's a very major developments going on in the region. We're talking about major changes to the geopolitical landscape, not only in West Asia or Middle East, but around the world. And that is why I'm doing what I'm doing as far as ensuring you being informed and keep up with the developments that's going developing today. And like I said, for the two players, US and Israel, this still, as of today, maintaining and retaining that option of the military strike. It's on the table. I am here to tell you that that option is still on the table. Whether it's going to be on a nuclear facilities or elsewhere, I do not know. And only for one reason. And that reason is because Iran doesn't have a nuclear deterrent. That is the only option for that. And with this leads me to the two things that I told you I will talk to you about towards the end here. And in the form of question, I will greatly appreciate if you could answer this question for me. I'll put it later on for the rest of the community who did not have a chance to join us here. And the question is, could Iran, in your opinion, purchase a bomb from North Korea? Let me repeat the question. Yes or no? Please just answer that. Could Iran, in your opinion, purchase a bomb from North Korea? Yes or no? And the second thing I want to talk to you about briefly is regarding the Saudi role. Tomorrow, I'm going to be releasing a video. That's something nobody's talking about. I'm not going to get ahead of it. Make sure to watch the video tomorrow. I'm going to release it very early in the morning. You can listen, and it will make more sense to you to see a much bigger picture that no analyst, no media, nobody's talking about. And I hope it will make more sense to you. So, hope you enjoy this, and I look
You know the type. Runs up the bill and slips out before it's paid, like Nathan Watkins. Watkins wants to...
When there's a dip
has soured on its view of the credibility of the Trump administration?
Vladimir Putin once said that, as president, he doesn't have any friends. So, your question souring implies at one point in time, Putin thought there was sweetness. Putin is the leader of Russia, and he is a very professional leader of Russia, which means he takes Russia's best interests into account in everything he does. So when there's a diplomatic opportunity that, Russia could take advantage, and remember, Vladimir Putin has always sought to avoid confrontation, to avoid conflict. And he has proven time and time again, even once the decision was made to enter this special military operation, that he was looking for a viable off-ramp, not one that allows Ukraine and NATO to retain the capabilities and posture that prompted Russian intervention to begin with, but one that recognizes the legitimate spheres of interest and influence of all parties involved, including Ukraine. So, I believe that, he has kept the door open. When you do diplomacy, you put on your best face and you put on a posture of reception. But I do believe, listening to Lavrov speak about Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, whom you've met and interviewed, speak about Alaska
the bitterness in his voice. And Lavrov is somebody who, disguises his emotions. He's a very professional, experienced diplomat. But the bitterness in his voice, when he talked about the fact that Vladimir Putin went to Alaska, sat down with Donald Trump, and made concessions, painful concessions, in an effort to bring about an end to this war. Now, the specifics of the concessions made aren't known, but we can, I think it's fair to say that they probably involved the freezing of the front line in Kherson and Zaporizhia in exchange for the Donbass being turned over to Russia in totality. And this would have been a very difficult concession for Putin to make because constitutionally it's problematic. He would have to go back and face a Duma and a federal council that would not be happy with him, making a decision that is constitutionally, in question. Is Zaporizhia and Kherson are, after all, constitutionally part of Russia in their totality. So he made these concessions under the belief that the United States was serious about negotiations, and then to listen to the disdain in Lavrov's voice as he talks about how Trump went back to Washington, D.C. and immediately received the Gang of Seven from Europe and began renegotiating the agreement that had already been reached. I think the Russians right now recognize the reality that the United States is not a honest and trustworthy negotiating partner, not a serious negotiating partner. And then we have to compound this by bringing up that which the Russians should be bringing up more, but again, because of their diplomacy, they don't. December 29th, in the attempted assassination of Vladimir Putin by 91 Ukrainian drones that were sent to their target, the residence of the president, by the CIA's intelligence with the knowledge of the president of the United States. I think the Russians are waking up, not only that the United States does not negotiate in good faith, but that the posture of the United States is one that is grounded in policies that are about bringing down the regime of Vladimir Putin. That's what we call it, the regime. We don't talk about the legitimate government of Russia. It's the regime of Vladimir Putin, bringing it down and replacing it with one that would be more compliant to the United States. And I think the Russians are finally waking up to the fact that this is the reality. And look at New START. I mean, it expired, but the fact of the matter is the United States is not a trustworthy negotiator. How could Russia even begin to entertain arms control agreements with a nation that is seeking to strategically defeat Russia and to use arms control agreements as a vehicle to gain strategic superiority or supremacy? This treaty was fundamentally flawed. Donald Trump is correct on that, but it's flawed because of the lies told by the United States. As we speak, Judge, as we speak, the United States is in the process of bringing back into active service up to 40 B-52 bombers that were supposed to have been decommissioned as nuclear delivery weapon systems. And the Russians said at the time, hey, this is fake. If you guys are telling us that these are decommissioned, you can bring them back. And we said, no, this is right. We're bringing them back because we lied. And we're doing the same with up to 24 launch tubes on Trident submarines, launch tubes that were supposed to be permanently decommissioned as part of the treaty. We're now bringing back. We lie on everything we do. And I think the Russians are waking up to that reality.
I'm going to play a clip from Sergei Lavrov. It's a restrained anger, but it's a profound understanding, I think, of the American government. It may be from the same talk to which you referred a few minutes ago. The question I'm going to ask you after we watch this together is he speaking for President Putin or just for himself? Chris, number two.
President Putin has repeatedly said, no, we are not refusing to use the dollar. Under Biden, the U.S. has done everything to turn the dollar into a weapon against those who are out of favor. And I would like to point out and emphasize that the U.S. administration, notwithstanding the various public statements we have heard regarding the urgent necessity of bringing a conclusion to the war in Ukraine, that was originally unleashed during the Biden administration. We need to come to an agreement, remove it from the agenda, and then clear bright prospects for mutually beneficial Russian-American investment and other cooperation will open up. But all the laws that Biden passed to punish Russia after the start of the special military operation are not being challenged by the Trump administration. For example, in April, the state of emergency law was extended, the core of which is the punishment of Russia, the imposition of sanctions against Russia, including the freezing of our gold and foreign currency reserves. This is explicitly stated as being due to Russia's hostile behavior in foreign policy. And as examples, interference in United States elections is cited, the very thing President Trump categorically opposes on a daily basis and rejects all of it. And violations of international law, human rights. There's no end to the list. This is all pure Bidenism, which Trump and his team reject outright, but nevertheless they calmly extended it. The law of the sanctions against Russia continue to be in effect.
Here's why your prostate problems keep coming back, and the easiest way to fix it without drugs, surgery, or endless trips to the bathroom. I'm going to show you the hidden reason you keep getting up at night to pee, and why nothing has worked so far. Look closely.
I think he's 100% correct. Is he speaking for himself or for President Putin or both?
Well, first of all, Sergei Lavrov is the foreign minister of the Russian Federation, so he doesn't speak for himself. When he speaks for the Russian Federation, which means that his words must be consistent with the policies of the president of Russia. There's no light, there's no gap between what Sergei Lavrov is saying and what the president of Russia likewise believes. And indeed, if you've been following the Russian president like I have, these are the same words. The Russian president has said the same things over and over again. A sentence here, a sentence there, a sentence here. What Sergei Lavrov has done here is bring them all together in one coherent, statement of fact, of reality. That I would just, again, because he's a diplomat, he's he is much more cautious in his words. The Trump administration, man for man, with the possible exception of Tulsi Gabbard and J.D. Vance, and maybe RFK Jr., they are the Biden administration in terms of Russian policy. These are Russophobes. These are people who hate Russia. These are people who have been actively working during the Biden administration to bring down the government of Vladimir Putin. Remember Marco Rubio, our current Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, dual-hatted, constitutionally questionable. He, as a senator, sought to bring down Russia. He was never a friend of Russia, never one to promote good relations. Scott Bessent has never been promoting good relations. He is talking about bringing the Russian economy to its knees. We can go down the line. There is not anybody on the Trump administration that's actively today articulating the necessity to break free of the policies of the Biden administration. The Trump administration's policies, as they currently exist in terms of cognizable written statements, are the Biden administration's policies. Donald Trump, as the president, with some executive leeway, has said this, said that. But the bottom line, what we are doing today is the same thing we were doing under the Biden administration, providing intelligence, providing the ability to strike deep. We've gone even worse. Trump has authorized the CIA to use Ukrainian drones to assassinate the president of Russia, something the Biden administration never tried to do. So, I would just remind Sergei Lavrov, who I respect deeply, that there's nobody in the Trump administration, even the president, that has tried to create distance between the Biden administration's policies and what's going on today in the Trump administration. The Trump administration continues to seek the strategic defeat of Russia. They continue to seek the downfall of the presidency of Vladimir Putin.
Wow. And Trump's disapproval rating is 56%. I don't know that it's ever been that way since the depths of Watergate with respect to Richard Nixon. Switching gears, as we speak, what do you expect Prime Minister Netanyahu and his colleagues are telling President Trump?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that there is no again, distance between Trump and Netanyahu when it comes to Iran. They both have articulated regime change as their preferred option. And we need to keep this in mind in everything that we talk about when it comes to U.S. policy in Iran. Donald Trump authorized the Israelis to launch a decapitation strike against Iran in June that went beyond the military, where they did successfully decapitate some senior officers. They tried to kill the president of Iran. Remember, he had to crawl out of a building that was collapsing because of a bomb that struck. They tried to kill the supreme leader of Iran, but he had moved. He didn't stay in the same place. He wasn't where he was supposed to be that night. They want to replace the regime. As recently as earlier this month, you had the Trump administration talking about, Iranian people in the streets. We need to bring down this horrible regime. This regime has to go. It's time to replace them. That's the policy of the United States. And that's the policy of Israel. Now, the question is, how do you implement this policy? Israel's made it clear that they cannot sustain a long, drag-out war with Iran, that they can absorb about 700 missiles. That's 3 to 5 days worth of fighting. And then Iran must be dead. The regime must be gone. If it goes beyond that, the pain becomes too hard for Israel to bear. And so Israel is cautioning the United States not to begin, understand what I'm saying, not to begin military operations until which time Trump is certain of an outcome. And there's no way you can be certain. Donald Trump is talking about bringing a second aircraft carrier into the mix, the George W. Bush. That would be the Abraham Lincoln, George W. Bush. Operation Desert Storm, which was a strategic air campaign against Iraq in 1991, 6 aircraft carriers were deployed together with multiple Air Force fighter and bomber wings, thousands of aircraft, attacking a nation that's a quarter the size of Iran. And, we don't have the military capacity to strike. Moreover, with all the aircraft that we brought in against Iraq, we couldn't destroy 19 mobile Scud launchers that launched 49 missiles against Israel. We weren't able to interdict that. Now we're talking about Iran that has thousands of missile launchers, tens of thousands of missiles. We're not going to interdict this. We can't. And so they're not talking about war. Everybody's in there saying, oh, Netanyahu's saying Trump's got to go to war, got to attack. It's the opposite. Netanyahu's saying, what do we do? Because we both know we can't attack Iran right now, because if we attack, Iran will ride out the attack. They'll destroy Israel. They'll destroy all the bases that we have. I mean, we have 16 tankers at Al Udeid Air Base. The Iranians right now today could launch a preemptive strike, cognizable in Article 51, self-defense of the United Nations Charter, using the Caroline affair, which is a Supreme Court decision about preemptive self-defense because of an imminent threat. Those tankers are there to refuel aircraft. Donald Trump has said he's going to use to bomb Iran. You don't have to wait for the attack. There's the imminent threat. Take them out. They could do that. And if they did it now, we'd lose everything because we can't defend against it. We can't defend against what the Iranians are going to throw against Israel. We can't defend what they're going to throw against us. We can't defend what they're going to throw against the region. And that's the other voice here too. Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, all of these oil-producing, gas-producing nations will lose the totality of their energy production capacity if there's a major regional conflict. This will not only be devastating for them, but the world. You mentioned Donald Trump's, popularity or unpopularity rating. It's going bad now because of some of the domestic policies he's made. If he goes to war against Iran, he's sunk. He not only will lose the House, he could very well lose the Senate. And if he's not careful, he could lose the Senate to the degree where he could get convicted once he's impeached, because he will be impeached. There's no doubt about that. If Donald Trump attacks Iran, he will be impeached because he will lose the House. And if he attacks Iran and we have thousands of American dead, we have a collapsed economy because this man went on a war of choice that could have been avoided had he been serious about diplomacy. We wouldn't have had this. The American people will not forgive him. His base will not forgive him. He campaigned on a platform of peace, avoiding the very kind of conflict he's talking about getting us into. And again, you talk about Lavrov. I'll finish with this. The disappointment of Lavrov. Think about the Iranians for a second. Iraqi has to sit down with Jared Kushner, who's not qualified to do anything, to be honest, but he's now half of the negotiating team. Before Kushner went to the Middle East to negotiate, he was meeting in the United States with Iranian diaspora leaders to create the next government of Iran. So we're sending a man to negotiate with the Iranians for an outcome that's supposed to be equitable. At the same time, he is actively conspiring with Iranians in diaspora, including the Shah's son, the former Shah's son, to create a government to replace the government he's negotiating with. This is stupidity, that's on a different level. Then you have Steve Witkoff, who decides it's a good idea after he negotiates with the Iranians, allegedly in good faith, to go to the Abraham Lincoln. Our negotiator is walking the decks of an aircraft carrier as if he's somehow telling the Iranians, you need to fear me the next time we meet because I have the might of the Abraham Lincoln behind me. Whoop-de-doo. One aircraft carrier against Iran. The Iranians aren't losing any sleep over this.
Well, what will Russia do? What will China do if there is a major attack intended to decapitate the leadership of Iran? They're not going to let Iran become dismembered, which is the Netanyahu's dream.
Well, they don't have a mutual defense pact. So, the idea that Russia is going to intervene militarily on the side of Iran, or that China will intervene militarily, is difficult to see, especially now with Russia, deeply engaged in this conflict in Ukraine. It's going their way, but there's a heavy commitment of resources for this. They also had to build up military capacity to deal with NATO expansion. And so to suddenly commit to a direct conflict with the United States over Iran, I think that's a bridge too far that Russia is not going to cross. And China, again, I don't see China projecting military power into Iran that way. What they are doing is providing intelligence information, providing military equipment that has already proven to be effective. I mean, ask yourself how the Iranians became so familiar with Starlink, so familiar that they were able to track the totality of usage of Starlink by the Mossad and CIA opposition people during these recent uprisings, and then shut it down instantaneously. They don't have that kind of experience. Russia does in Ukraine. And I think Russia has provided them with this kind of intelligence, to include special equipment that enables the implementation of this tracking and shutting down. I think the Russians are providing a whole bunch of stuff to the Iranians. I wouldn't want to be a B-2 bomber pilot going over Iran in this next thing, because I think you're going to get shot down. I wouldn't want to be an F-35 pilot or an F-22 pilot, same way. Russia has been following this, tracking this. They've deciphered the everything we do, to include radar signatures, etc. And I believe that Russia has opened the books and provided the Iranians with this data. And that's all the world. The Chinese are providing real-world satellite information. The Iranian missiles right now are targeted on exactly where everything is. There will be no guesswork. And so, if the balloon goes up, it will. The Iranian missiles are going to hit the targets they're aimed at. Their targets are going to be based upon real-time intelligence data collected by China. This is what China and Russia are doing to make sure that any engagement by the United States and by Israel will be extraordinarily painful. And I also believe that the Russians are letting the United States know, maybe not the specifics, but the gist of the assistance, that you're going to get a bloody nose if you go in there. It's going to hurt. Now, Donald Trump is too cocky. Pete Hegseth is just too stupid. And these are people who believe their own propaganda. But the Joint Chiefs of Staff aren't stupid and cocky. They're realists. And they didn't get to where they are by misleading themselves or misleading the troops they lead. And I believe they have already told the president, we can't win this war. Not on the timeline you need us to win this on. The price we're going to pay is going to be prohibitive, and it's going to take us forever and a day to assemble the forces necessary to defeat Iran. And by the time we do that, there may not be anything left to salvage. The region will be in flames. And then when we go in, there's no guarantee we're going to win. I just, again, remind your audience, Iran's been preparing for this war since 2005, back when Dick Cheney articulated a desire to carry out a regime change strike against Iran. At that time, Iran broke its country up into 12 or 20 military districts that are capable of operating independent of control from Tehran. So we could nuke Tehran, and these independent military districts will continue to survive. We can take them out one at a time. They won't surrender collectively. We would have to occupy all of Iran. And remember, each one of these military districts, especially the ones that are in the vicinity of Turkey, and Israel have independent ballistic missile launch capability, which means they can continue offensive military operations until they run out of missiles, and they have tens of thousands of missiles stockpiled. The Joint Chiefs of Staff know this. They're briefing the President of the United States, and this is why the President hasn't bombed, because he can't bomb. And 2 aircraft carriers isn't going to give him any leverage to change that calculation.
Do you share the fear of some of your colleagues who come on this program that this might become a regional war that would involve other countries? For example, what would the Turks do?
Get tax expertise without hidden fees. Switch to a TurboTax.
Turks are going to get a nuclear weapon. That's what they're going to do. The Turkish foreign minister was silent when asked that question. I mean, this is a derivative of Trump allowing New START to expire. People don't realize that it's the end of the nuclear nonproliferation treaty. We've gone in the wrong direction. Nobody trusts us anymore. Nobody trusts the treaty, and nations are going to start to acquire nuclear weapons. What would Turkey do? Turkey's going to defend its own interests. What's Saudi Arabia going to do? They're going to lose their oil fields. What's Azerbaijan going to do? They're going to lose their oil fields. If this thing goes, it's going to go south for everybody involved, which is why it's not going to go. I mean, yes, I share my concern that if the balloon goes up, it's going to be devastating. But that's why it's not going to go up, because I'll just say this, and I know I'm going to irritate all of your pro-Trump people in your chat room, but I don't care. Trump is a moral and physical coward. He doesn't have what it takes to actually go to war against an enemy that can fight back. Iran would knock his block off, knock the military block. And Trump is also somebody, he's a narcissist. I mean, he is the most, malignant kind of narcissist. It's a disease, a mental illness. This is a man who wants to change the name of the Moynihan train station just because, what kind of thinking is this? But he is a man who, wants to have a legacy of success. And he knows for certain that if he goes to war against Iran, he doesn't get the quick victory, and his presidency is over. He will finish his life in jail, rotting, or in a house under house arrest. He will be the man who was impeached more times and probably convicted. So Donald Trump doesn't want that. He doesn't have the courage. If this was a man of conviction who said, I truly believe what we're doing in Iran is just, he would say, pound sand, we're going to war, and he'd stand in front of the American people and explain why we're going to war. He's not going to do that because he doesn't know why we're going to war. If he really got dug deep into it, he would come down. We went to war because of Israel, and then that truly double damns him. So Donald Trump doesn't have the courage, and he doesn't have the conviction to actually go to war against Iran. That's my personal belief. I don't think this man, he knows what the reality is, and there's no amount of force that can be assembled anytime soon that changes that calculation. He has to knock the Iranians out 3 to 5 days into the war. The Israelis have made that number very clear. They can absorb 700 Iranian ballistic missiles. That's 3 to 5 days. After that, all bets are off. Israel is irreparably damaged. Netanyahu cannot politically survive, and therefore Israel's saying, don't do it. And right now, Donald Trump, the chiefs of staff are telling him it's going to take months. Remember,
is Trump hearing from anybody, not Hegseth or Rubio or Sebastian Gorka or Stephen Miller, but maybe General Kane? Is he hearing from anybody, anything resembling the articulate, very sound analysis you just gave?
General Kane is telling them that we can't win this war in 3 to 5 days. Trump has put forward, remember, Trump was trying, he tried. Trump said, let's attack Iran now. But it was supposed to be a quick regime change attack. And the Joint Chiefs said, A, we don't have any defense in place. The Iranians are going to knock us out. We got nothing. B, we don't have enough military power in place. What do you want to do? This isn't going to be June, the 12-day war, where through perfidy you had the Iranians sleeping in their beds when Israel attacked using our intelligence. The Iranians are ready. Their leadership is split up and underground. Their missiles are out, targeted, ready to launch. We don't have the military capacity to knock them out. We can go in there, bomb a couple targets, and then they're going to knock us out. Stop. And that's why he stopped. Lindsey Graham, you remember Lindsey Graham was running around chuckling, chortling about how this was going to happen. I've never been more proud of this president. He's Ronald Reagan. He's done. He is the best thing in the world. And now Lindsey Graham's looking at going, we better do something because we gave them our word. The Iranian people have been given our word. And now he's critical of Trump. But the reality is Donald Trump knows from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we can't knock Iran out. And Israel can't knock Iran out. So there's no reason to try. If you're going to strike the king, kill the king. They can't kill the Iranian king, so they're not going to bomb. That's my conclusion.
Wow. But he will be under tremendous pressure, maybe coercion. Who knows what Netanyahu has in his briefcase. He'll certainly be under pressure from Mrs. Adelson and her billionaire buddies to comply with whatever Bibi wants. Does Netanyahu recognize, or do you believe, you understand the man's thinking as warped as it is, do you think Netanyahu understands that this could be a death sentence for Israel as he knows it?
He already told this to Trump. Remember, it's Netanyahu that stopped the last attack. You remember the headlines. Israel and Saudi Arabia are calling Trump saying, don't attack. Israel. Why? Because Netanyahu knows. Netanyahu is the one that gave Trump the 700 number. We can absorb 700 missiles, no more than that. Anything more than that, and it becomes difficult for us to continue to survive as a modern nation state, and becomes almost impossible for me to survive politically. This has to be a knockout blow. So that's a standard set by Netanyahu. He's not coming in with a master attack plan saying, oh, if we do this, we do that. Netanyahu knows what the rules are. He's coming in to make sure that Trump doesn't negotiate something, to make sure that Trump is staying on script, that the nuclear negotiation is not designed to achieve a solution to the problem, but to extend the time frame. We're not here to resolve the differences between Iran and the United States. We're here to muddy the waters, to make sure that there is no final agreement, there is no final settlement, so that when the time comes, if the situation changes, if the CIA and Mossad can once again resurrect these various cells inside Iran that can rise up and challenge the regime, that when the time comes, we're ready to strike. What Israel doesn't want is for the United States to get off track. That's why Netanyahu met with Kushner and Witkoff. I mean, that Zionist cabal there, it's sickening. I'm not anti-Semitic. I don't want to imply anything other than the statement of fact. When you have pro-Israel Zionist members of the Trump administration meeting with Bibi Netanyahu and plotting this out, it makes it clear who America works for. America doesn't work for the American people. We work for the interest of Israel. And right now, Israel is telling the President of the United States not to do the one thing that would be good for the American people. It would be good for the American people to have a deal with Iran, to bring peace and stability to the region. That would be good for the American people. Donald Trump won't be allowed to do this. He will have to continue.
Have you been wondering how people turn side hustles into full-blown online businesses that make
to muddy the waters, to extend this, to make sure that there is never a viable deal with Iran. And that leaves the door open for military action down the road.
Scott Ritter, thank you very much, my dear friend. A brilliant, gifted, and courageous analysis if ever I heard one. Chris reminds me that our favorite senator from Iran, its relationship to Russia, but especially its relationship to China. But first, a couple of background questions to allow you to run loose for us a little bit. Does Iran pose the slightest threat to the national security of the United States of America?
Absolutely not.
Well, the only argument, that's pretty direct, the only argument that the Trump administration can make is that their friends in Tel Aviv can't tolerate having Iran that close to them and not subject to them.
Absolutely. And this touches on the key issue here, sovereignty. There are very, very few sovereign nations in the world, and Iran is one of them. And not only sovereign, but not subjected to the diktats of the international financial system and the weaponized dollar. From the point of view of Washington, of course, and the Atlanticist axis, we can put it this way, this is anathema. Of course, there's not much they can do against Russia and China. Superpowers, both, and one of them, the number one nuclear superpower in the world. But against Iran, they think they can. So that's why we have, as you just mentioned, Tel Aviv issuing diktats that should be followed by the Trump administration. So Israel gets its war against Iran, which is viewed by Israel as an existential threat. And this brings us to the triad of diktats. Iran should not have a nuclear enrichment program, period. Iran should decrease its ballistic missile program to the bare minimum. And Iran should not support what all of us independents call the axis of resistance, including the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah, militias in Iraq, etc.
This is effectively a demand for Iran to surrender its sovereignty.
Capitulation, exactly, Judge. It's capitulation. If you don't capitulate, you're going to be attacked. And that's where Trump comes in, because the final decision is going to be his. And he is between a rock and a very, very hard place.
What is the vice that is squeezing President Trump on this as we speak? We know what his Zionist donors want. We know what his masters in Tel Aviv want. What are the countervailing factors, or what are the factors he's considering, if he's even considering them?
Exactly. Excellent, Judge. If he's even considering, don't forget, he's not a strategist. It's epidermic reaction, usually. We can talk, of course, about the Epstein files, but all of us everywhere are speculating on what the Epstein files really reveal about Trump-Epstein relationship. There are many possibilities, including the fact that he was deep into it. So this is being used, obviously, by the masters of that death cult in West Asia as a form of pressure against him. But the most important thing is his donors. The people who finance his re-election, they're all hardcore Zionists. And of course, the diktats apply to this international Zionist axis, from Washington, New York to Tel Aviv, and including capitals in Europe.
Find everything to say, I'm yours, this Valentine's Day at Specs.
Trying to predict the future is a hazardous occupation. The only thing we can be sure of is that it will be absolutely fantastic.
Do the Russians trust Donald Trump?
No, they not anymore, Judge. I'm sorry to break the news.
Did this happen in part as a result of mimicking Foreign Minister Lavrov now? I think you know this, what he said to the BRICS. Yes. You may have been there when he said it.
Yes.
The Biden sanctions not only have not been removed, they've been exacerbated. Some of the Biden sanctions, the public reason for them is, you ready for this? Russian involvement in the 2016 election, which Trump himself has denounced. And the third leg of this monster is the CIA's involvement in the drone attack on President Putin's home in Valdai.
Novgorod at the end of last year, Judge, very important, because Novgorod, there is a presidential residence in Novgorod, but most of all, Novgorod is part of the nuclear triad. It's a command and control center, part of the nuclear triad. That was the target. The residence, let's say, may have been a sub-target, but the Minister of Defense in Moscow, they have the evidence that the Americans were behind it. And they handed over that evidence to the US military attaché in Moscow. The thing is, considering everything that was especially not leaked, we don't know if this evidence directly implicates the CIA or a rogue cell of the CIA or a rogue cell in industrial military complex, etc. But there was American direct involvement, that's for sure. And after that, the point of view of the presidency in Moscow and the Security Council, including our unplugged friend Medvedev, who is allowed to say what he thinks, in public,
Right.
changed radically. And now we have Lavrov himself saying that the spirit of Anchorage is practically dead. This is very
Lavrov has led us to believe that there was a handshake and some personal agreements between the two presidents in Anchorage.
True.
And we don't know what they were, but they never happened.
But they never happened. That's the point. There was an agreement, and that's why the Russians keep on coming back to what was agreed during those 5 hours, a very, very long conversation. And I remember a few days after Anchorage, whenever the Minister of Foreign Relations in Russia was talking about it, they were saying, look, we have agreed on a set of guidelines, and we hope to progress from there. But then nothing happened. And that's why we can see, even from Lavrov and Ryabkov, number 2 at the foreign ministry, uber diplomats, they are obviously exasperated. The language, the tone changed completely compared to, let's say, 2 months ago. Completely. And after the attack in Novgorod, wow, that was the straw that broke the nuclear camel's back.
Right. Again, before we get to China and Iran, and I have to say that you have a piece called How the China-Iran Strategic Partnership Really Evolves. It's been distributed to my Substack people, but more important, it's in the op-ed section of judgesnap.com. I encourage everyone to read it.
Thank you.
Encourage the people that read it to send it to the White House. It's granular. It gets into a lot of detail. We're going to get into some of the detail in a minute, but before we do, does Beijing trust Washington?
Of course not, Judge. Wow. I was in China last week. Remember, when we talked, I was in Chongqing. Chongqing, as you know, is directly administered by Beijing. It's one of the only 5 cities in China that have this status. So Chongqing is very, very important. So a lot of important information flows through Chongqing. And it's obvious that the Chinese are basically studying millimeter by millimeter the positioning of the Trump 2.0 administration. But obviously, they do not trust it at all. I would not say that the Russians are at that level, but the Chinese are already on another level. And now the Chinese are much more assertive than they used to be in what they do practically and in what they say in their foreign ministry briefings. And, coming to the, I would say, the core of this column that you just mentioned, which was published an hour ago or so, now they're actually helping in terms of military intel, Iran directly, which is something that did not happen before the 12-day war. So now we are in a completely different ballgame.
All right. So again, before we get into the nitty-gritty in your article, I'm glad you just mentioned about China helping Iran intel. And we know the same can be said for Russia, correct?
Sure.
Okay. So there's a theory making the rounds this morning in the West that the January 13, 14, 15, whatever it was, cancellation of the attack on Iran was a stroke of Donald Trump genius. Please pardon that oxymoron. claiming that it was all planned, it was all plotted to induce Iran to expose its defenses and expose what it plans to do as soon as the attack is coming, and that Mossad, MI6, and CIA took note. Why is that theory nonsense?
It's total nonsense because what this actually means is that a few people in the Pentagon may have noticed that the Chinese were literally, I wouldn't say on the ground, but in the seas. Chinese vessels were already in the Sea of Oman. And this means 2 destroyers, one of them the most important destroyer that the Chinese have. It's considered the best destroyer in the world. research vessel. It's called the Ocean Number 1, translated into English, and another support vessel specialized in tracking undersea activity everywhere with some of the best radars in the world. So they were already there in January. January means a few weeks ago.
Well, it was about a month ago. This was the middle of January. We're now approaching
less than 3 weeks ago.
February. Talk to us about the commercial relationship between Beijing and Tehran, and why China simply cannot afford a destroyed, damaged, or fractured Iran.
Absolutely. I backtracked a little bit in the column.
Sure.
Going back to the Islamic Revolution was end of 78, beginning of 79. This was right at the beginning of Deng Xiaoping in power. And it's very important to remember what the Chinese were talking about the revolution at the time. I would say between 79, 80, 81. That was the first few years of Deng Xiaoping before he ordered China to start growing like crazy in his famous 82. Well, the Chinese intellectuals were looking at this revolution as a revolution organized from a religious point of view in terms of Shiite theology, but also in neo-colonial, under a neo-colonial overview. So it was a mix of both. So in China, this became extremely popular, especially after Khomeini himself at the time, he said, our new foreign policy is going to be neither east nor west. Obviously, people in Beijing found that, wow, so now we can have a very good close relationship with the Persians like we used to have in the past, like during the Silk Roads, for instance, when we were the two top powers in opposite ends of the Silk Road, and our main interest was doing trade with each other.
Right.
So the long cultural interpenetration of Persian culture, Chinese culture, this comes from centuries. And now it's renewed because two key factors. Number one, Iran is one of the top energy suppliers of China. So Iran for China is a matter of national security. And number two, Iran is the most important node in West Asia of the new Silk Roads, of the Belt and Road Initiative. Most of the trade traffic coming from China, crossing Central Asia, and then going to Europe, goes through Iran before heading west. So they are important from a geoeconomic point of view and from an energy point of view. So you simply cannot have a destabilized Iran, because the Chinese know very well, if Iran is destabilized, it's going to be absorbed by NATO, and it's going to be immediately anti-Chinese.
So what, aside from intel and aside from this, the proximity of this destroyer, two destroyers, what can and will the Chinese do? I mean, can we expect the destroyer will fire on American naval ships that are attempting to send missiles to Tehran?
No, Judge, it's much more subtle than that. They are integrating their grid, their radar high-tech grid, with Iran and vice versa. Iran is using Beidou. It's not using GPS anymore. So Iran is already linked to the Chinese satellite system. And the Chinese are providing satellite information gathered in real time, 24/7, on the movements of the US Navy in the Arabian Sea. By the way, they are not in the Sea of Oman. The Americans are not, they don't have the balls to get into the Sea of Oman, because they would be very close to the southern shores of Iran and very close to these Chinese ships. So they are in the Arabian Sea. This means they are, to put it roughly, south of Pakistan.
All right. So are the Chinese destroyers there just to send a message or to do something militarily?
No, they are there to send a very clear message. Like, look, we are looking at what your Navy and what your submarines are doing 24/7. Not only we know where you are, but we are monitoring your communications. Because this is part of the ocean #1 research vessel. It analyzes signals information, it analyzes everything, and of course they are being tracked in real time. So all of us can assume that people with the brain at the Pentagon are aware of that. And some of them are trying to tell the president, look, this is what's going on with us. We cannot risk an attack because the response is going to be heavy metal, to say the least.
Chris, can you post the president's Truth Social, I think from last night?
Yes, exactly. That so if there's no deal.
Okay, so here is what he said.
Right.
After he finished meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I've just finished meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel and various of his representatives. It was a very good meeting, the tremendous relationship between our two countries. There was nothing definitive reached other than I insisted that negotiations with Iran continue to see whether or not a deal can be consummated. If it can, I let the Prime Minister know that will be a preference. If it cannot, we will just have to see what the outcome will be. Last time Iran decided that they were better off not making a deal, and they were hit with midnight hammer. That did not work well for them. Hopefully this time they will be more reasonable and responsible. Additionally, we discussed the tremendous progress being made in Gaza and the region in general. There is truly peace in the Middle East. Thank you for attention to this matter. I mean, this is such nonsense. A, there is not peace in the Middle East. B, last time it was not the Iranians that didn't want to negotiate. They were on the way to the negotiating hotel when the Israelis and the Americans began their bombing.
Absolutely, Judge. And what we have at the moment is the imposition of this triad of diktats by Israel, which is exactly what Netanyahu yesterday was doing in the White House, forcing Trump to make this decision. And the way it's interesting the way Trump phrased this post. It's non-committal, in fact. The most important part is that he's basically saying, look, the Israelis want me to start a war. I don't want it. I still want a deal. If there is no deal, we're going to see what happens.
Okay, but the president and the Secretary of State have made it clear. You said this at the outset of our conversation 20 minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
No nuclear enrichment. Get rid of your offensive weapons and stop aiding your allies. All of those are non-starters. We know that for reasons of sovereignty and common sense. So what are they negotiating?
There's one, let's say, there's a window, Judge.
As a father of 2 daughters, I know how important it is to protect our loved ones. But liberals are...
The Iranians might agree, for instance, on enrichment up to 60%. Let's put it this way, between 50 and 60%. But if I'm not mistaken, some officials, including members of the Majlis, the parliament, Iran said, okay, we could agree on that, but the US has to destroy all the sanctions against us, which we all know will never happen. So it's not going anywhere.
Talk to us a little bit about Iran and Russia. What is unseen between... I'm using your word. I didn't come up with this because you're...
I put it between commas on purpose, Judge, because...
It resonated with me. What is unseen between Moscow and Tehran?
None of us know. And if anybody says they know, they're lying, because this is considered in Moscow as a supreme national security military matter. And this is the stuff that is discussed. I could venture to say that not even between Arakchi and Lavrov. This is discussed at the highest level when the Iranians send a direct emissary of Ayatollah Khamenei to meet with Putin in Moscow. This is the kind of stuff they discuss. And of course, between the ministries of defense. This means what kind of hardware and software was transferred from Russia to Tehran in that series of IL-76 flights a few weeks ago. They were going every day from Russia to Tehran. Nobody knows for sure. It could be anything. It could be aerial defense, SIGINT communications, missiles, you name it. And nobody's going to leak anything about it in Moscow or in Tehran. That's why I call it unseen, but it's there.
How embedded, either physically or digitally, is Russian and Chinese intel with Iranian intel?
It's not totally embedded. In the case of, I would say that now in the case of China, it's much closer because now they are sharing top of the line satellite intel in real time. So this means that the Iranian grid is integrated with the Chinese satellite grid. I'm not sure this is the case with Russia. And none of us can tell for sure because the Ministry of Defense in Russia will never tell any of us about it. So maybe it's more pinpointed, the kind of help coming from Russia to Iran, not necessarily linked to satellite intel. But for instance, when we remember that during the beginning of the 12-day war, when there was that famous blackout of the whole Iranian grid, and they were panicking because they were not prepared for that, they were saved by Russian technicians between 24 to 48 hours, and everything was put back in place by the Russians in less than 2 days. That's why the Iranian military machine started to work after 2 days. So we can assume that the degree of collaboration is also very, very close.
Last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, I think it was earlier this week, was the anniversary of the fall of the Shah.
Of course.
And we had a clip from an American journalist who was on the ground in Tehran. He said he was surrounded by 2 to 3 million jubilant Iranians. Pepe, this was covered nowhere in the Western press. Are you surprised?
No, I'm not. From China, I took a look at European media. There was not a single comma about that. You're absolutely right. And there are numbers which are mind-boggling, that perhaps 40% of the Iranian population hit the streets. This was the number one participation in terms of celebrating the Islamic Revolution in these past 47 years. It's immensely impressive because it shows that deep Iran and also the major regional capitals, they understand the stakes. They understood the logic behind the attempted regime change last month. They are siding with the government, even if many of them are not necessarily pro-government. They understand that the economic crisis that they're going through nowadays was basically inflicted by the Americans via manipulation of the real, which at the time many of them couldn't make this connection, and now they can. So that explains practically half of the Iranian population in the streets, right?
Wow. The Chinese foreign ministry just issued a statement. It's about Cuba. It's not about Iran, but it could easily apply to Iran. China again strongly urges the United States, in accordance with the United Nations constitutional decree and principles, they mean the United Nations Charter, as well as international basic standards, they mean international law, immediately cancel all sanctions against Cuba. I mean, Iran's a member of the United Nations, so theoretically, the Americans should have to go to the Security Council before attacking Iran. They won't do that. They don't go to the Congress. They don't go to the Security Council. Trump feels constrained by nothing.
It's going to be an executive order, right, Judge? If there is it's going to be an executive order.
Yeah. Chris, can you put up the photo of Secretary of State Rubio and Prime Minister Netanyahu. I mean, when the United States puts this out there, we'll have it in a second, showing that Benjamin Netanyahu has signed an agreement personally to join Trump's ludicrous board of peace. There's a semi-smiling Benjamin Netanyahu and an apparently happy Marco Rubio. And then Trump issues a statement saying there's peace in Gaza and in the Middle East, two statements profoundly erroneous. What message does this send?
Wow, Judge, this is something that I discussed in already, I think, 2 or 3 podcasts this week and in one of my columns. When you have a president of the United States, in his own words, saying, I don't care about international law, only about my morals, and you see this picture, and you see that he's receiving with the highest honors a war criminal in the White House responsible for the killing of untold numbers of civilians, including children in Gaza. And when you mix that up with the fact that his morals are not minimally concerned with what's in the Epstein files, which is essentially, I would say, the perfect Polaroid of how a great deal of Anglo-American elites behave. And this was considered normal since the go-go 80s.
Wow.
That's it.
Yes, yes. Do you have sort of a feeling in your gut of whether we can wake up some morning and find out that an attack has begun? Or do you think that these negotiations between the Americans and the Iranians will proceed in normal diplomatic fashion and in an atmosphere of nonviolence?
Well, many of our friends, including our friend Larry Johnson, they are saying that the decision has been made already for an attack. If that's the case, this is beyond terrifying. Next week, I'll be in Moscow. So I'm going to ask the Russians directly and expect some answers about if they are convinced that this should be the case. The Chinese, for the moment, they are acting, in fact. You know, this message that they are sending, these naval messages they are sending means, okay, if you try something, you're going to regret it. But obviously, we know that the warmongers in the industrial military complex, among Trump's donors, and among this international Zionist axis, New York, Washington, Tel Aviv, they don't care about that. They only want their war. And this is what Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday was telling the president of the United States. I want my war, and you have to launch it.
Wow. Pepe, thank you, my dear friend. I know we've been across the board, but your analysis and in many cases your firsthand knowledge is extraordinary and valuable, an invaluable asset to us. Thank you for joining us. Safe travels to Moscow. We'll look forward to seeing
Northern Star and his unique mix of determination and serenity in the face of some of the worst beasts of the so-called mainstream media. The man who's faced them all and bested them is Professor Said Mohammed Marandi, and he joins me now, not in the studio, but in Moscow. So we were together just, I think, last evening, Professor. So good to see you again. But this is a very auspicious day in your country. Tell us about that.
Thank you very much for having me, George. It's a great pleasure and a great honor being on your show. And I had the privilege of being with you, your wife, and your son last night. It was a great pleasure meeting them as well. Yes, today is an important day. It was the 47th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. I really love this city. Moscow is beautiful, but today I really wanted to be in Tehran, and the crowds were extraordinary. There were millions of people on the streets of Tehran, 4 million according to estimates, and tens of millions of people on the streets across the country. I posted some of the footage on my Twitter account, and it shows very clearly where ordinary Iranians stand. And that is exactly why Western media, Western pundits, Western so-called Iran experts will not cover the rallies today across the country, because it runs against their fake narratives on the country, that it is the so-called regime is falling apart and the people hate the regime and it's collapsing. These are just narratives that they use in order to justify aggression. Western media is controlled by the Epstein class. It's controlled by the Zionists. It doesn't matter if it's so-called left or right. The mainstream media is controlled by these people, and the narrative on Iran is clear as day. But those who want to seek the truth, all they have to do is look at the images of Tehran. After 47 years of war, sanctions, terrorism, and the difficulties that life has. I mean, if you ask those people on the streets of Tehran today, is life good? Is the economy doing well? I'm pretty sure 70, 80% of them would say, no, it's difficult. But despite all that, and despite the West imposing all this hardship, they come to the streets and in defense of the revolution, in defense of the Palestinian people, and in opposition to the regime in Washington. And I think I was very.
It is quite brazen, Professor. I mean, it's more than lying by omission. It's brazen falsification to not report to the viewers and readers that they have been telling for weeks, months, years, decades, that the Islamic Revolution was hated by the people of Iran. My best estimate from all the sources that I've read is that between 23 and 26 million people were demonstrating for the 47th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. Now, for Western media to not report that is brazen falsification.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when they were claiming that first 10,000, then 20,000, then 50,000, then 80,000 people were just being gunned down on the streets of Tehran, even though there was no internet and they had no names and no information. So they were more than willing to lie about numbers, when in fact it was Israeli intelligence and Western intelligence agencies that carried out those atrocities. They boasted about it. Western media pretended that these intelligence agencies were silent. The footage was out there. They didn't show it. They just pretended that these were peaceful protesters. And the reason for all that is to demonize Iran. The reason for that was to create the grounds for invasion, for aggression, for murder and death and destruction. And what the people in Iran did today was say, no, we support the Islamic Republic of Iran, and don't start killing us in the name of saving us. And that's exactly why they don't want to show it, because it rejects the whole premise of the argument. What the West is saying is that we have to destroy Iran to save Iran. And the Iranians are saying, thank you very much. We're fine where we are, and leave us alone.
It is, of course, a moot point, but Donald Trump, it seems to me, and Chris Hedges had the same view just a few minutes ago on here. Donald Trump does not actually want to go to war with Iran, not the least because of the consequences for his very generous friends in the Arab countries in the Gulf. After all, who's going to shell out the gold and diamonds and pearls to him and his son-in-law on subsequent visits to the region if all these regimes have been swept away. So Chris and I both believe that Trump is not signed up to use the hardware that he has so expensively dragged all the way to the Persian Gulf, and that's why Netanyahu is in the Oval Office right now trying to strong-arm him, either by compromat or by other means. What's your take on that, Professor?
I think that's absolutely correct. I think that the military officers and the generals and those in the know would tell Trump that, look, if there's war, the Iranians will destroy the oil and gas facilities, the ships, the tankers. They'll shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And these tiny family dictatorships, which host U.S. bases in the Persian Gulf, they will not survive. You have Qatar where the regime has 350 to 400,000 passport holders and millions of foreign workers, mostly adult males. The Emirates has 1.4 million passport holders and 10 million foreign workers, many indentured servants and workers and semi-slaves, and mostly adult males. If these regimes become unstable, it's clear what will happen. So Kushner and the Trump family, they are making enormous profits from the Persian Gulf region, from whether it's Qatar or the Emirates or Bahrain. They're making huge amounts of money. And if these regimes are swept away, then that money's gone. But also, if Iran shuts down the oil and gas trade, then the price of energy will go through the roof. And that will bring down economies across the world. And it will be Trump that people blame. And I don't believe at all for a second that Trump can mobilize public support for any war against Iran. Those days are gone when you had to go to the US Senate and stand up to senators to expose them for their fake excuses to attack Iraq. Now people don't trust the regime in Washington. The Epstein files, which every day we're seeing new bits and pieces that discuss this more and more, Americans are seeing it too. Everyone knows what the reality of the political class in the United States is. So I don't think at all that Trump can persuade Americans to back him for war. And as soon as things go south, people in the United States will blame him for it. So I think that both because of his own selfish interests in the Persian Gulf region, and also because of the fears of what would happen to the economy, he definitely does not want war. But we were negotiating with this guy months ago. Between the fifth round and the sixth round of negotiations, he was conspiring with his close buddy Netanyahu to attack Iran. So Iran is going to be very wary. It is not going to be deceived. The armed forces are preparing for the worst. But I do believe that you're absolutely correct. He is personally not interested in war.
Now, you mentioned the Epstein files, and you were, of course, formerly a professor of American studies, now English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. You have I think, unparalleled in all the Iranians I've ever met, an unparalleled knowledge of and interest in Western societies, whilst being a man of the East, descendant of the Prophet, pious religious man from a historic family, and so on. You are actually the perfect bridge between the peoples, at least, of West and East. So let me ask you what you think of the Epstein files and how they relate in particular to your part of the world. I shouldn't be surprised, but it did surprise me that the UAE's first woman diplomat in New York was, how shall I put it, intimately connected to Jeffrey Epstein and Moreover, was keen to introduce her sister, who's even more pretty than me, she said, although only 14. I shouldn't be surprised, but actually I was. Were you?
No, I shouldn't be surprised either. I mean, we've been watching a genocide take place and continue to happen right before our eyes every day in Gaza. And we see Lebanese children being slaughtered regularly on a regular basis too. So we really shouldn't be surprised. But some of the things, including what you've just mentioned, are just they still shock us despite everything. And it's not just in my part of the world. I'm in Moscow along with you all day today. I've been speaking to Russians. I've been on show after show, meeting people, many of them mutual friends, and many are big fans of yours. Literally, George, literally, I'm not exaggerating, literally everyone has been saying that we, meaning Russians, Iranians, Orthodox Christians, Muslims, we are on one side, and these anti.
Find your perfect tax expert. Whatever your tax situation might be.
God, anti-morality, anti-human elites in the United States are on the other side. We are on the right side of history, where we support morality, we support religion, Christian and Muslim. We support children. We oppose all these crimes that are being carried out by these people, and they stand on the other side. They are the enemies of their own people, and they're our enemies. It's been so interesting today in particular how everyone has been stressing that we are all on the same side, Russians and Iranians. We're all standing against this monstrous entity, this class of corrupt billionaires and powerful men mostly. And that woman and her daughter, they reflect something much bigger and darker. Most of the Epstein files are still undisclosed, and those that have been released are mostly redacted. It's obvious that what is being hidden from us is far worse than those bits and pieces that we now see. And people are still going through these 3 million files and finding new bits and pieces of horrific information. But it is quite interesting. It is quite fascinating how my Russian friends who are not connected with one another, I meet them separately, and they're all saying more or less the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's all proof that Satan is present in the world, that evil stalks the land and is present in the world, and sometimes on top in the world, and would appear to be on top in these elites that you talk about. Prince William of the Royal House of Britain was today in the presence of the very Arabian prince who wrote to Jeffrey Epstein thanking him for the torture video. I'm not making that up, and I don't want to embarrass you or anyone else by naming any more of these rat-like figures, but they don't only exist in the West, do they? They have plenty of accomplices of Satan everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. And the closer they are to the regime in Washington, the more names you see from those entities. The Emirates is the closest ally of the Israeli regime. And both of these messages that you were quoting, whether that woman diplomat or that head of the Dubai ports or whatever that organization is called, they're both from the Emirates. The woman offering her sister, this man showing great pleasure in the torture video. It's obvious that such a regime in the United Arab Emirates should be a close ally of the Israeli regime. It should be an ally of Netanyahu. It should be supporting the genocide in Gaza. That's exactly what we're seeing in these messages to Epstein. That they have no morality, they have no shame, and I have no doubt that these two are the only figures in the Emirates or in the Persian Gulf region either.
Professor, this watch I'm showing you now was given to me by the late and great Sheikh Zayed, the former ruler of the UAE, the man who built the UAE, whose grave I attended quite recently. He built something quite special and quite authentic, but not to put too fine a point on it, it's all gone awry since he died. That's the problem with family dictatorships, isn't it?
Oh yes, and it's not just his; it's Qatar. All of these regimes are playing extraordinarily destructive roles across our region and beyond. The drug trade in Afghanistan goes right through the Emirates. The gold that is taken from illegal mining across Africa, it all goes through the Emirates. In Qatar, ISIS, the home of ISIS and the funding of ISIS and Al Qaeda, it all comes from gas money. That oil and gas money from family despots who, instead of building their own countries, instead of building Africa, instead of building Asia, instead of building Arab countries, impoverished countries, instead of supporting the Palestinian people, instead of strengthening Egypt and neighboring countries of the Israeli regime so that they can stand up to this disgraceful racist regime, they spend it on destroying country after country by expanding corruption, by expanding extremism, cooperating with Western intelligence agencies. That's all they seem to be able to do. And paying billions of dollars to the Trump family and his allies. That's all they can do. They've done nothing. I mean, even Qatar, some people praise Qatar for the World Cup. Some say that the money that they spent was above tens of billions of dollars. They created a huge metro that's empty. They built all these stadiums that are no longer used. They built so many hotels, and they spent billions on a few football games. They could have built countries. They could have changed the situation in across Africa with that sort of money, but they refuse to do so. Instead, they pay Trump's family and his allies money so that they can keep their regimes afloat. They pretend to be supporters of the Palestinian. The Emirates doesn't even pretend, but Qatar pretends that they're supporters of the Palestinian people, but they've never given a single bullet to the resistance. They've never made any sacrifices. If they did, they'd be sanctioned, just like Erdogan and others. And again, the last time I was on your show, George, and I raised this to you last night. I mentioned names, which I won't hear, but you are an exile, and you no longer can go back to the UK. There are people in the UK who pretend to be supporters of the Palestinian people, who supported the dirty war in Syria, who have lots of funding from the Persian Gulf. Are they exiled? Are they in trouble? No, because they are working in close coordination with the regime in London. There's no doubt that the money that Qatar pays, the money that all these dictatorships in our region pay, these Western dictatorships pay, it's done in full coordination with Western governments and intelligence agencies.
I've been a pastor for over 20 years. This is a very important message that I urge every American to pay close attention to.
Every major news network is saying the same thing. Saudi Arabia will abandon Iran when war hits. They are all wrong, and not in a subtle way. They are missing the trap. The economic cage, the military noose, the religious obligation that makes abandoning Iran literally impossible. Why they need each other? Now, to understand this alliance will hold even under fire. You need to understand what's actually at stake. The Persian Gulf isn't just important to Saudi Arabia and Iran. It's one of the most critical waterways in the world. About 30% of all global oil and gas passes through it. 1/3 of the world maritime trade flows through these waters. Now, think about what that means. If the United States goes to war with Iran, it doesn't just affect Iran, it affects Saudi Arabia directly. As argued in my book, Volatile State, Iran in the Nuclear Age. Oil shipments gets disrupted. Shipping becomes dangerous. Insurance costs skyrocket. The global economy suffers. And Saudi Arabia, well, they lose billions. But here is the deeper strategic calculation. Saudi Arabia realized something crucial over the past year. For decades, they thought the US Navy will protect these shipping lanes. The US will keep things stable. America will be the guarantor of their security. But when Trump took office and made it clear America was pulling back, Saudi Arabia had the stark realization, we can't count on Washington anymore. We need to protect our own interests. Now, enter Iran into the picture. Iran has been dealing with American threats and sanctions for 46 years. They've built up military capability specifically to defend against the US. They have naval forces, missile technology, cyber capability, and the will to resist and fight. In other words, Iran has exactly what Saudi Arabia needs, the ability to push back against American dominance in the region. What about the religious factor? Nobody's talking about. Now, here is where it gets really important, and most Western analysts completely miss this. There is a religious dimension that actually reinforces this alliance. Saudi Arabia is the guardian of Islam's two holy sites, Mecca and Medina. Millions of Muslims from around the world make pilgrimage there every year. That's not just spiritual, that's power. Saudi Arabia has religious authority across the Muslim world. Iran, meanwhile, is the center of the Shia Islam. They see themselves as defenders of the Shia Muslims globally. For years, they've positioned themselves as standing up to Western hegemony, not just for Iran, but for Muslims everywhere. Here's the thing. When you actually look at the Quran and the Islamic teachings on unity and mutual defense, there is a principle called wala, which means loyalty and alliance among Muslims. It's different from the Christian turn the other cheek theology. Islamic tradition emphasizes that Muslims should stand together against external aggression and oppression. For decades, this principle was overshadowed by the Sunni Shia divide. But when you are facing existential threats from outside the Muslim world, when America is threatening military action, that external pressure actually unites Muslims around this principle of collective defense. It's not that religion suddenly makes them love each other. It's that religion provides a framework for why they should stand together. And this matters because it's not just pragmatic realpolitik anymore. It's also about legitimacy. If Saudi Arabia abandons Iran when America attacks, Saudi Arabia loses credibility with the broader Muslim world. They become seen as the American puppet, the traitor to Muslim interest, though some say they already are. But if they stand with Iran, they become the defenders of Muslim sovereignty. That's worth more than any weapons deals. The economic cage I mentioned earlier that they are trapped in, it's not just ideology. Look at the economics. Saudi Arabia and Iran just committed them to massive trade deals. They are planning joint currency systems. They are integrated into BRICS with China and Russia. They are building an economic relationship that makes separation extremely costly. Think of it like this. If they break up their alliance when war hits, they don't just lose military support, they lose their trading partners. They lose access to BRICS networks. They lose their path to economic independence from the US dollar. And all the progress they've made towards financial autonomy gets erased. And here is the brutal truth. The United States knows this. If America punishes Saudi Arabia for standing with Iran, they will sanction them. They will freeze assets, including gold. They will cut off access to American markets and technology. So Saudi Arabia faces a choice: lose everything by abandoning Iran, or lose everything by staying with Iran. At least if they stay with Iran, they have a partner in the pain. If they have someone to share the burden with, that's not a comfortable alliance. That's a necessary one. And necessary alliances are the most durable. The unbreakable Russia-China alliance is a case in point. Why military logic favors unity? Question that I ponder about. Now let's talk about the military dimension, because this is where the logic becomes airtight.
Haram, haram, haram. Definitely haram. The better way to start your own online.
If the United States attack Iran, who suffers? Not just Iran, Saudi Arabia does too. US warships in the Persian Gulf will be vulnerable to Iranian missiles and naval forces. Oil infrastructure gets targeted. Shipping becomes a war zone. Saudi Arabia's ports, refineries, and energy infrastructure, the foundation of their economy, all become legitimate military targets in any escalating conflict. So Saudi Arabia's strategic interest isn't just in supporting Iran. It's in making sure any US-Iran conflict stays limited and controlled. And the only way to do that, stand with Iran militarily so the cost of escalation becomes prohibitively high for the Americans. This brings to mind the concept of mutual assured disruption. Think about it from America's perspective. If Saudi Arabia is openly allied with Iran militarily, then the US or any US strike on Iran could trigger Saudi retaliation. Any blockade of Iranian ports means a blockade of the Saudi port. Any naval action becomes a regional war, not a surgical strike, and Americans not interested in a regional war. It's too expensive, too unpredictable, too risky. This is what military strategists call raising the cost of aggression. Saudi Arabia standing with Iran doesn't mean they are going to fight America side by side. It means they are making it so expensive and risky for America to fight Iran. That war becomes irrational. There is a historical precedent. You know what's interesting? This has happened before. Countries that hate each other have united against larger threats. During World War II, the Soviet Union and the United States were bitter ideological enemies. They wanted nothing to do with each other. But when Nazi Germany threatened both of them, they became allies, real allies. They fought together and won. After the war, they went right back to hating each other. But for those crucial years, shared survival overrode everything else. The same thing happened with China and the US during the Cold War. They fought in Korea. They opposed each other everywhere. Then when the Soviet Union became the bigger threat, to both, Nixon went to China and they aligned. It lasted decades because the threats was real. What we're seeing with the Saudis and the Iranians is exactly this pattern. The threat is American hegemony. The threat is the loss of regional autonomy. The threat is external domination. And when you face an external threat that is big, internal differences don't matter anymore. Your survival first, then you fix the problems later. In fact, some historians argue that the Sunni Shia conflicts only became this intense because the West divided the region and played both sides against each other. Without that external pressure and interference, the natural state of Muslim majority nations is cooperation, not endless sectarian war. Remove American hegemony, and the religious and sectarian tensions might actually decrease, not increase. So the question becomes, why will they stand together, you may ask? I argue that Saudi Arabia will stand with Iran or stand by Iran, not openly, as you may think, if war looms in the Persian Gulf, not because they have suddenly become friends, not because religion has magically resolved their differences, but because three items. First, their economies are now integrated. Breaking the alliance destroys both. Second, their military security is interdependent. Alone, they are vulnerable. Together, they are a problem for America. And third, their religious and cultural identity is tied to defending Muslim sovereignty against Western domination. Abandoning Iran means betraying that identity. And fourth, the alternative, isolation and subjugation, is worse than the cost of standing together.
As a father of two daughters, I know how important it is to protect our loved ones. But liberals are releasing.
So what's really happening here is the emergence of a multipolar world. America, or the United States, had 80 years of being the dominant superpower, but that era is ending. We are moving into a world where multiple centers of power exist, multiple alliances, multiple systems. Saudi Arabia and Iran are just the canary in the coal mine. What they are doing, other countries will do too. And this alliance, this messy, complicated, unlikely alliance, might be the model for how rising powers resist hegemony in the 21st century. The war they are worried about might never come, or it might. We don't know. But either way, don't expect Saudi Arabia to fold. They are in this now. They are committed. And the logic of power, economics, and survival all points towards staying the course. Hitting the larger significance. This isn't just about the Middle East. This is about the fundamental restructuring of global power. If Saudi Arabia really does stand with Iran against American pressure, it signals to the world that the age of American dominance is over, that smaller nations can band together and resist, that alternatives to the American-led system actually exist and are viable. That's why this moment matters so much. And that's why you need to watch this carefully. The future global power depends on this. If you want to understand the world that is actually emerging, not the one Washington wants you to believe in, subscribe for more analysis that goes beyond the headlines. And don't forget to hit the like button. As always, remember, geopolitics impact your daily life in more ways than one. Till next time. Thank you.
unexploded U.S. munitions in Iranian nuclear sites, nuclear facilities, have been identified. It's worth remembering the U.S. mainly used Tomahawk missiles and GBU-57 bunker buster bombs. Unexploded munitions can be reverse engineered. The U.S. has given their most precious technology directly to the Iranians, seemingly. I would imagine that technology would probably be pretty useful in the hands of the Russian armed forces or the Chinese PLA. I'd imagine they would actually find that extremely useful. I would imagine it probably would not take long for their engineers to, reverse engineer what made that missile so special. One man's trash is another man's treasure. That is the story that I want to take a look at now, because apparently when the United States decided to carry out this massive, the biggest, the most successful, the most deadly, the most damaging strike ever in the existence of the U.S. military, as Trump calls it, on the Iranian nuclear sites, something went horribly wrong for the United States, but it went very well for the Iranians. All right. This is actually pretty incredible for a number of reasons, but it has been reported, according to Iran's foreign minister, and we'll read his statement here in a second, that the existence of unexploded U.S. munitions in Iranian nuclear sites, nuclear facilities, have been identified. Now, it's worth remembering, the U.S. mainly used Tomahawk missiles and GBU-57 bunker buster bombs. All right. Unexploded munitions can be reverse engineered. And Iran, Russia, they probably have the best, missile engineers on the face of the earth. The U.S. can't even produce a hypersonic missile. China, North Korea, Russia, Iran all have them. I do believe that this is actually pretty unprecedented, crazy, and a major screw up from the United States. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi disclosed Sunday that unexploded ordnance from the U.S. Operation Midnight Hammer remains at key nuclear sites like Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, calling for new IAEA safety protocols before any inspections. The bombs, allegedly including massive 30,000-pound GBU-57 penetrators dropped by B-2 bombers and Tomahawk missiles, date back to the June 2025 12-day war when the U.S. joined Israel's campaign against Iran's nuclear program. While U.S. officials claimed success in obliterating facilities, Iran says they've repaired some of the missiles potentially. Social media speculates on reverse engineering intact GBU-57s, though experts doubt Iran could deploy copies without suitable aircraft. My guess is that if Iran can get, things up into beyond the atmosphere, they can probably get a GBU-57 up into the air, and they've also got Su-57s coming. So the reason why this is so important, is not even just for Iran. We'll get to what I mean by that in a second, but let's first take a look at why it is important for Iran. This is the first time an Iranian official has made such a claim about the attacks during the 12-day war. A GBU-57 would be insane and extremely dangerous. This is Elijah Magnier writing, Iran will soon produce its own 14-ton GBU-57 bunker buster bombs to use probably against Israel's nuclear facilities in case of war or even the assassination of its nuclear scientists. Iran's foreign minister has confirmed that unexploded bombs remain inside the Iranian nuclear facilities that failed to detonate at the Fordow nuclear facility. The foreign minister's disclosure about an unexploded GBU-57 appears unlikely to have been accidental or purely technical. In strategic communication terms, it can be read as a layered message directed at Washington. First, it signals resilience by indicating that Iranian teams reached the interior of the struck site and assessed the damage. Tehran is implying that the strike did not achieve its intended objective of disabling the nuclear facility. Second, it introduces leverage. Possession of unexploded U.S. ordnance carries intelligence and technological value. Publicly acknowledging it hints at a potential bargaining chip, linking the issue implicitly to long-standing Iranian demands such as the release of frozen financial assets. Third, it serves as a deterrent signaling. The suggestion that such material could, in principle, be studied or transferred raises the costs of escalation and invites negotiation. The underlying message is not necessarily transactional in a literal sense, but strategic. Pressure can be reciprocated with counterpressure, and escalation can be converted into bargaining chips.
Do not pay your car insurance bill. I repeat, do not pay your bill yet. So I found this website and look at the difference.
Okay, now what he's talking about there in the last point is actually probably the most important point, because there is, as far as I know, there is no equivalent to these GBU-57 bunker buster bombs. Okay, the Russians, as far as I know, I mean, yes, they've got their Orishnik system, they've got the Budavestnik, they've got Poseidon, right? These are nuclear capable devices. But as far as a non-nuclear bunker buster bomb, as far as I know, there's nothing like it. China obviously has developed their own equivalent that's superior to the B-2 bombers. But as far as the payload, this is actually unprecedented, okay, in terms of what the enemies of the United States have. So now that Iran has this, it's not so much, oh, can Iran develop a launcher? Does Iran have a launcher? Does Iran have the means to launch something like this, whether from the air in the future with maybe, I don't know, they develop like a massive drone or so. I don't even know, right? I'm not an expert in this stuff, but obviously they have pretty impressive launchers. Do they have the means to do it? That's not the question. I don't think that's the question as much as, is Russia interested in this technology? Is China interested in this technology? That's the real point that needs to be made here. The U.S. has given their most precious technology directly to the Iranians, seemingly. Just dropped it from an aircraft, of course, thinking it was going to blow up their nuclear sites, but instead handed them precious U.S. military technology. I would imagine that technology would probably be pretty useful in the hands of the Russian armed forces or the Chinese PLA. I'd imagine they would actually find that extremely useful. I would imagine it probably would not take long for their engineers to, reverse engineer what made that missile so special. And the fact that Iranians have that now, supposedly, if you believe what he's saying here, and it's kind of like a random thing to lie about, if you were to lie about it, I think it's true. The fact that the Iranians have it, it literally doesn't even matter so much about their own capabilities. Okay, they're going to take a look at it. They're going to study it. Maybe they use it now. Maybe in the future it becomes useful for them. But how it's really useful in the immediate, right now, this very second, is to say, hey, Russia, you know how we've been wanting things X, Y, and Z? We haven't been prepared to do the deal that you were saying, this, that, and the other. It's like, hey, China, you know how we've been wanting this from you? We have a GBU-57 now. How about that? And in all likelihood, the Iranians have known this for quite some time. And I'm sure that these talks and negotiations about this technology has already been had with the Russians and the Chinese, right? But I'm just giving you a look at how the conversation, I would imagine, probably went if this is all true. So there's that. Doesn't look good for the United States. They don't have hypersonics, and now their patented, unprecedented, unparalleled bunker buster bombs are in the hands of Russia, China, North Korea, and even Iran.
Kofi, follow me.